2020 sucked. Sorry, that was probably a really sad way to start the video. And I know we're all sick of thinking about last year. This pandemic and its economic, social, political, and personal consequences have been a lot. And in return, all we really got was this supercut of
unprecedented times.
Unprecedented times.
Unprecedented times.
See, I understand you. But in my New Year reflection a few weeks ago, I found myself coming back to my experimentation with Alvin Lucier's I Am Sitting in a Room back in April. And I want to reflect on it here because it's been so relevant to our periods of prolonged isolation. Of sitting in rooms different from the ones everyone else is in right now. But more importantly, I want to reflect on it as we look ahead because in a lot of ways, 2021 is going to suck too. Sorry, I made it even sadder. Should I do another intro sequence? I Am Sitting in a Room was composed by Alvin Lucier in 1969. It's widely considered to be Lucier's most important work, and is arguably one of the most important sound art pieces ever composed. In addition to its fascinating exploration of acoustics, its use of time and transformation is at once grounding and metaphysical. The form of the piece, and the way that it works, is explained pretty succinctly by the piece itself, with the original script being as follows. I am sitting in a room, different from the one you are in now. I am recording the sound of my speaking voice, and I'm going to play it back into the room again and again, until the resonant frequencies of the room reinforce themselves, so that any semblance of my speech, with perhaps the exception of rhythm, is destroyed. What you will hear then are the natural resonant frequencies of the room articulated by speech. I regard this activity not so much as a demonstration of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have. So let's break that down a bit. In the piece, the performer creates a recording of their voice. Then they play the recording of their voice into the microphone, or they record the recording. Then they record the recording of the recording. Then they record the recording of the recording of the recording. Then they record the recording of the recording of the recording of the recording. And as that re-recording process continues, the original recording is further and further degraded until every syllable of the performer's recording is completely unintelligible, leaving only the resonant frequencies of that particular room. But Dr. Odell, what are resonant frequencies? Oh, why, I thank you for asking, but please, Dr. Odell is my father. And my sister. You can just call me Dr. Jill Biden. To put it simply, resonant frequencies are pitches that will oscillate at higher amplitudes or volume in that space. This phenomenon is not particularly noticeable in your casual, everyday settings, but in the re-recording process of I Am Sitting in a Room, these properties become so exaggerated that the previously hard-to-notice properties of the room become deafeningly clear. Sound in space works as it does because sound is not a physical object. Sound is simply one of the ways that we perceive motion. When I'm speaking, my vocal cords are vibrating, which is pushing against air molecules in my throat, which then push the air molecules into the room, and these molecules bump into other molecules until they reach your ear, or in this case, they reach my microphone, and then that sound file is transmitted through the internet, and then that goes through your speakers and then to your ear, but all of these vibrations are caused by displacement and perceived as sound. Furthermore, the thing that makes my voice different from a piano or a dump truck is not determined by one kind of motion, but rather by countless motions perceived by our brain as one sound. Using a mathematical transform called the Fourier transform, you can break down any sound, from the sound of my speech to a baby's laugh to a trombone, into a series of these. These tones are called sine waves, and they are the building blocks of every sound you hear. When the sine wave goes up, it represents a period of compression where the molecules are getting closer together. And when it's going down, it represents a period of rarefaction where the molecules are getting farther apart. A single loop of compression and rarefaction is called a cycle. The more cycles that occur over a given period of time, the higher the pitch, with fewer cycles per second, or hertz, creating the perception of lower pitch. With sound being a consequence of movement, These cycles have to occur in a physical space, so when I Am Sitting in a Room is performed, the many frequencies that occur as the result of a person speaking are filtered through that space over and over again. Let's talk about jumping rope. Just for fun, not for metaphorical reasons or anything. When my roommate and I swing the jump rope at equal speed and intensity, we maintain a consistent swing that would make us a joy to play on the playground with. However, if one of us swings timidly while the other one swings with reckless abandon, the swings on each end are not in sync with each other, and it causes interference to the swing of the rope. Something similar happens with sound. What? It was a metaphor the whole time? Whoa, who could have seen that coming? If a given sound, or more accurately, a part of a sound, is able to complete a number of cycles equal to an integer, those frequencies will be amplified by the reflection of the room, as their periods of compression and rarefaction are in sync with each other. Any part of a sound that would have its cycles interrupted by the surface are attenuated or made softer due to periods of compression and rarefaction canceling each other out. In repeating this process over and over again, Lucier's I Am Sitting in a Room exposes the present room modes, the collection of frequencies that are excited by a particular space, usually a fundamental between 20 and 200 hertz, and a collection of overtones above it. Over the course of the performance, which can last anywhere from several minutes to several hours, the recording is transformed from this, I am sitting in a room, to this, I am sitting in a room, to this. So now back to the reimagining. Back in April, toward the beginning of the pandemic, I performed I Am Sitting in a Room in 4 different rooms in my home in Baltimore. Knowing that I would be spending at least the next 3 months in quarantine, New Zealand, let me come live with you. And knowing that I had no desire to do home workouts or learn how to bake sourdough bread, I decided to use Lucier's piece as a thought experiment. While perhaps less humorous than playing Brahms with air horns or clapping music with clappers, this reimagining helped me contemplate my relationships with the spaces that I found myself occupying more and more. I was first introduced to the work of Alvin Lucier as a freshman music composition major. As an undergraduate, I was at the peak of my get involved with everything, stay as busy as possible mentality. As you can imagine, that also came along with impatience for anything that required, well, patience. I found myself clicking through recordings such as I Am Sitting in a Room, listening to 10 seconds before skipping ahead 5 minutes to get, the gist of music by Morton Feldman or Steve Reich or Julius Eastman, and anyone whose work required an attention to longer temporal developments. If this pandemic had happened in 2011, I would not have taken the forced contemplation of isolation well at all. Then, fast forward 9 years to 2020, I'm studying composition pretty much the entire time. I've become a huge fan of minimalism and sound art and music that just develops over long periods of time in general. But more importantly, I start recognizing how unsustainable my work-life balance is. I spend years going in and out of therapy, and among other things, I learned to thrive in an environment that rewards patience and focus without undoing the regular structures that help me push myself and maintain clear goals. But also, in 2020 alone, that regular structure went to shit, and like everyone else, I had to build this shoddy makeshift version of it in my house with nothing but a Zoom Pro account and the sound of my own thoughts. One of the first things that I did after the pandemic started was record I Am Sitting in a Room in 4 different rooms in my house. On one level, I did this as a joke, because it's like, haha, we're all sitting in rooms different from the ones everyone else is in right now. And yes, I know, performing a sound art piece in a bathroom is comedy gold. But one thing you need to know about me is that I believe that nothing is just a joke. Humor has meaning, and life is one big, profound shitpost. I also just did this for intellectual curiosity, and because I had a newfound desire to familiarize myself with my spaces. I had lived in this particular house for the better part of a year, but I had never really taken the time to consciously observe it. Our homes often have these little idiosyncrasies, something which uncovering resonant frequencies helped me notice. Like how the clashing timbres and clustered pitches of my kitchen reflect the variety of materials and the oblong shapes that define its interior, or how the quick destruction of the original recording in my bathroom was the result of its harder porcelain surfaces, or how the tall ceilings in my otherwise cramped office created room for both the fundamental and its higher partials to come through. Okay, which speaking of my office ceiling, what is this? Why does this look like this? It's so janky! Why is it so janky? I am sitting in a room, different from the one you are in now. I am recording the sound of my speaking voice, and I'm going to play it back into the room again and again and again and again and again, until the resonant frequencies of the room reinforce themselves, so that any semblance of my speech, with perhaps the exception of rhythm, is destroyed. What you will hear then are the natural resonant frequencies of the room, articulated by speech. I regard this activity not so much as a demonstration of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have, rather to pass the time during quarantine, a way to consciously observe the different spaces which I occupy, a way to feel and offer solidarity as the perception of our spaces is transformed through prolonged isolation. Alvin Lucier's original script, the one I used in my first recording, gives us insight into the personal meaning of this piece for him. Having dealt with a stutter for much of his life, he sees I am sitting in a room as an opportunity to, quote, smooth out any irregularities his speech might have. It was, in a way, therapeutic. However, he also recognized the wider effects this piece may have on his audience. How we all have irregularities. During this period in world history, people were changing, as were their relationships, to technology, to society, to those closest to them, and to their spaces. He notes in the original score that any text may be used, and that rooms should be selected for a desire to evoke their musical qualities. In 2020, in a world where we suddenly needed to expect more and more from the rooms we were still allowed to occupy, Lucier's piece from 1969 provided some therapeutic practices for me. For all the reasons that this pandemic has, without question, sucked, finding the silver linings has been a necessity for my mental health, and I'm sure many of you feel the same. For many individuals, it's given them time to learn a new skill or pursue something they previously didn't have time for. Or it's allowed time to re-examine priorities, or heck, even just pause for a bit. But let's be real. For many people, those silver linings have been thin or non-existent. And one of the things that has made this pandemic and its resulting turmoil continue for as long as it has, at least here in the United States, is our refusal on a societal level to slow down. So, I'm reflecting on my April 2020 performances here in January of 2021 because things won't get better until we as a society have both the state of mind and a collective material ability to slow down. Now, I'm not going to pretend I'm sitting on some moral high ground here just because I'm perfectly happy sitting in my basement and shooting deer in Red Dead Redemption 2 for several hours at a time. But now more than ever, it's a good time to reflect on the moment and the different rooms that we all sit in, to accept the fact that things have to be difficult before they're going to get better. While I Am Sitting in a Room wasn't written with a global pandemic in mind, and I liked this piece well before last year, it wasn't until 2020 that I learned to truly relish every moment of its evolution when I perform it, or when I listen to someone else's recording. It's in sitting in that process and letting it transform, in savoring every little degradation and amplification, that it truly became a transformative piece of music for me. I am sitting in a room, different from the one you are in now. And it's probably where I'll be for a little bit longer. The room you're in now and the time sitting in front of you are possibly quite similar. So, what are you going to do about it? Thank you for watching my video.